We are talking to the activist base. Like, we have the ability to move the needle. This is the one place you can go if you want to reach these people who have a deep, deep connection to this.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Our guest for Overtime, really excited about this, is Sam Seder. Have we got Sam Seder online now?
I'm here,
Yes, we
I
do.
think.
Sam,
Can you
welcome to
hear
the
me?
program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Sam is the host of the Majority Report. I think probably most everybody knows who Sam Seder is. And he has COVID right now. How are you feeling right now, Sam?
I'm feeling better than I have in about a week, to be honest with you. So I'm on the mend. I first got symptoms, I guess a week ago, yesterday. And when I woke up last Saturday morning, I was testing and I tested negative. I got a PCR that day and still negative. Felt crappy through the night. Coached the baseball team Sunday morning, fortunately outside. And I was at, first base coach for most of that time. So it wasn't, terribly close to the kids, fortunately. And a day later on Monday, I tested positive. So, but it's been pretty rough. But I'm feeling much better these days. Thanks.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And that's it's definitely a bummer that I know that you've been super careful with trying not to catch the COVID. It's honestly crazy that I haven't yet, being around so many folks. I guess I do get to work from home most of the time, so that's probably been a big part of it. But yeah, I'm really glad that you're feeling better. Glad you were feeling well enough to join us today. And
Thanks for having me.
What I reached out to you for to talk about is I'm interested in talking to you about Air America. It was a liberal talk radio kind of thing in the early 2000s, and one of the things that you talk about a lot when you talk about Air America is the mismanagement of it by the people at the executive level. So, now, can you just explain for the people who don't know? There are a lot of people who probably don't even know what Air America is. Can you talk to people about what Air America was and talk to us about why it ended up failing?
In the early aughts, there was a growing awareness of the power of right-wing radio throughout the country, and I mean that. I think there would have been a growing awareness of it for years. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, I think, launched in '88, I think it was, and really made his name during the Clinton years, and had become, in many respects, one of the most sort of influential voices in the Republican Party. I don't think it was acknowledged as such at the time, but I think those who sort of were paying attention understood that and weren't sort of trying to convince themselves of otherwise. And we certainly can see that 10, 15, 20 years later. But and so there was a lot of talk about doing this. In fact, in the run up to the Iraq War, I was in show business. I think I was directing a show with Gary Busey and acting in sitcoms, and but even I was very aware of just sort of the absence of any type of pushback in the run up to the Iraq War. And one night, a friend of mine who had a really well known show on a community radio station in New Jersey on WFMU, a guy named Tom Sharpling, invited me over to take over 2 hours of his show on a Tuesday night and do what was the first Majority Report. And John Benjamin, who voices the intro for the Majority Report, now has had a lot of success, completely unassociated with that, came over and did the intro live. I invited Janine Garofalo, who I ended up going to, working with on Air America, to be a guest. And that was in the run up to the Iraq War. I think it was in February of 2003. So there was a real awareness. I mean, and like I say, I was in show business, and if I was aware of the absence of any type of like media that was promoting any perspective other than sort of like the centrist or right wing perspective on mass media, it wasn't. That sense was in the air, and then in 2004, maybe it was late 2003. I got a call from Janine Garofalo, who said that she'd been asked to join this left-wing liberal talk radio network that was forming called Air America. Al Franken was asked to be on it and was basically the flagship show at noon. Mark Maron was asked to be on it. He did the morning show. Rachel Maddow was on it at first as a producer with Liz Winstead and Chuck D. They had a show. And Janine and I did a show in the evening, and also Randy Rhodes, who had been an actual talk radio, AM talk radio host. I think she was really the only one who was really like a true radio professional and knew what they were doing. She did like the 3 to 6 slot Eastern. And then Mike Malloy followed us at night. And I raised that because I know you want to talk about how, if there is an opportunity to do radio again, and he was on a network at the time called IE America, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure exactly what that stands for, but it was owned by the UAW. And it was only on a couple of stations, I think. And I think there may be, a model associated with that can be replicated. But so Air America launched. It got a massive amount of publicity because there was nothing like it that had ever been. It was the first radio network that was trying to launch within 30 years. And sadly, the guy who had launched it was a bit of a, there are some people, I want to be careful about this. There's some people who said that he had psychological issues. There's some people who just said he was just, a bit of a hustler, as it were. But he never had the money or the capitalization he claimed he did. And within several months, all the bills came due, and it was clear he didn't have the money. Then there was another sort of interim ownership team that came in and a new CEO. And this happened over the course of 5 years. We had, I think, 5 different ownerships and maybe 6 different CEOs during that time, including a period of time in Chapter 11 where the station sort of operated on its own, which was oddly, I think, the most successful period of time that took place. And I think there's also maybe sort of like a hint at a model there as well. But it was, in terms of numbers, in terms of ratings, pretty successful. I know that at least our ratings in New York and LA for the evening show that we had, we were beating Laura Ingraham and Mark Levin, because at one point we were over 2 different time slots, I think, and into 7 to 10. Then we moved to 6 to 9. And we were beating some of the biggest names in radio in New York. Some areas we would do better than others. Excuse me, that COVID's still lingering a little bit. And I know, like, Franken, at a time where there was no streaming technology, was getting up to like 30 or 40,000 people streaming him simultaneously. And this is before YouTube, before streaming him on real audio.
Wow.
Excuse me. And so that's the, that's basically what Air America was.
That's really amazing. Having 30 to 40,000 people streaming him, not even counting the people who are listening.
And that's in any given 5 minutes. Any given 5 minutes. It was measured by a 5-minute increments. At one point, I was the editor-in-chief of the website. And so I had access to this information. And for that time, it was astonishing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so the, why do you feel like then, the narrative basically of liberal talk radio is that, it's not going to work. There's no way that it can work. You can't finance this model. It just doesn't work. People don't want to pay for liberal talk radio. People don't want to listen to it. But the ratings were there, and so why did it? What was the reason then? And I think you pointed to it. It was management, right?
I mean, there was no radio at that time. Was essentially there was three different types of talk radio: sports talk radio, Spanish talk radio, and not political talk radio, but right-wing talk radio. And each of those genres have a different ad base. There was no one in the radio business who understood where our value lay. And it laid in two places, and I can give you two stories that illustrate this. Very early in Air America's history, maybe it was 2004, maybe it was 2005. There was a strike by the, I'm pretty sure it was the Rockettes at Rockefeller Center, and they were going nowhere. It was a tough strike. They couldn't get management to sit down at the table. They ran like 2 ads on Air America, and the impact of those ads was so great that management immediately contacted the union that represented the Rockettes and said, "We will sit down with you and give you this concession and that concession before we even sit down, under the one condition that you pull the ads." And for those of us who were sort of like, who understood this dynamic, we were like, we have just found the power of this network, which is we are talking to the activist base. Like, we have the ability to move the needle. This is the one place you can go if you want to reach these people. There may not be the same numbers that has been built because, we were just starting out that you might get with right-wing talk radio. But we are talking to people who have a deep, deep connection to this. And we should be going to every single union in the country and saying, like, we have found your people. If you need to reach them, this is how you reach them. And that completely made no sense to the sales force and the management, because none of this meant anything to them. They had never sold an ad to a union. They were never talking to this type of audience. So they were unable to monetize the value of what we were putting out there in terms of the numbers. And on top of which, they were also, radio people who, with all due respect to radio people, they're a lot more savvy now about this. But at the time, they were completely moronic when it came to the value, the idea of having an audience that was willing to pay for things like podcasts. At one point, I mentioned I was the editor-in-chief of the website, and sometime around 2007, I want to say, Tom Hartman came onto the program and onto the network, and he had made a deal, or I couldn't remember exactly what the details of it, but the long and short of it was, there was a website selling his podcasts for, I can't remember what the number was, but they were generating thousands of dollars a month. And for that time, understand, there's no Patreon. This is all some individual who is smart with tech, who's figured out how to create this type of thing. There was no advertising associated with it. And I think the number was something like, generating over $100,000 a year. And which at that time was a lot of money for us. I mean, and I would go to management and say, you just need to send this guy a letter and say, stop and desist, or even better, because you can't seem to create the apparatus, tell them, like, you're no longer selling our stuff without cost. We're going to split it with you, whatever the split would be. But management was allergic to this. And just did not think they wanted to be in that business, which was absurd. And so those were the two sort of biggest illustrations of the failure of management at different times to understand where the value lay.
Do you feel like that's because this is? I feel like this is something that we talk about on the show a lot. Is that, the people who do the work know how to do the work, and basically, if the boss will get out of the way, we can get it done. Do you feel like that? And the retort to some criticisms of CEO pay is that they're just worth that much. Basically, Elon Musk is worth billions of dollars. Like, he's just that smart. He's that valuable to the company. Jeff Bezos is that valuable to the company. Things like that. I mean, do you feel like that is the mismanagement of Air America? I mean, do you feel like that is illustrative of, broader trends and broader problems of organizing industries in such a top-down way, in a way where the people who are actually doing the work have the least amount of say?
Well, I'm not sure if I can draw how broad of a conclusion I can draw from this one experience at Air America. But I can tell you this, that one, we had in this country incredibly successful industries and companies through the 50s and the 60s where you did not have this type of pay disparity. I mean, there's just it's not – we only need to look to our own history to know that the idea that there is a CEO that is worth 100 times more to a company than any individual worker, otherwise the company is not going to be successful. We know that's not true, because we simply have to look in our own history to see that we can have industries that grow, exponentially without that type of dynamic. One thing that I do that I like, to the extent that I feel like I can generalize from Air America, that I saw, and it is one of the few corporate settings that I have ever worked in, is that the executives were working on behalf of themselves. They were not working on behalf of Air America. They were working on behalf of themselves. And sometimes that aligned with the interests of Air America, but far more often than not, those interests did not align. And so they would do things that would enrich themselves. And a perfect example of this is, so the shows had political people on them. Like, they were either really interested in politics or activists, or had come from sort of like the political world. And at one point early on, my producer, who has gone on to work for Bernie Sanders and as a senior policy advisor, is now working for the Labor Department, worked for Harry Reid at one point, approached me and said, "Hey, I've built this relationship with this company called Blue Digital." This was prior to the Obama years. It was they were a nascent sort of like demographic targeting internet agency. And I've developed some relationships there, and they want to offer their services to help us find our audience. And he said, I know that we're planning to do a big mailer because that's what radio did. They would send mailers in the mail. And this way we can make sure that our yield, who we're sending the email, the mailer to, is more likely to be an audience member of Air America. And we went to the management at the time and said, look, we have the ability, if you're going to send out 500,000 mailers and your average, yield of hitting a potential Air America listener would be, let's say, 10% or let's say 20%. Well, these guys can probably triple that yield, where 60% or 75% or 80% or 90% of the people who are going to be looking at that mailer are going to be potential Air America listeners, because they have data about what these people read, what's magazine subscriptions they get. They have voter file data, on and on and on and on. And it would have made that mailer so much more powerful, even to the point where you could say to these people, if you get an Arbitron listing, keep us in mind, because they have an activist mentality and they want to help the cause. And the radio guy was like, no, that's all right, because he wanted to go to his vendor who he had worked with for years before, and he knew that after Air America he would work with again, who had the ability to maybe help him out for his next job, because radio people are journeymen. And so they bagged it. We could have gotten those services for free. They put out that mailer at the cost of $500,000, and our ratings were actually lower the following quarter. It did less than nothing. Wow. And, the reason why these guys would operate the way they did is because they were looking to maintain their relationships in an industry in which they knew they would be looking to these people for a job down the road or for a favor. And I could literally walk through every one of those radio executives who did that very same thing, and it accomplished exactly what they wanted, which was, I have no idea. I've taken this job. I have no idea what I'm doing. I can't figure out how to monetize it. I don't know this world. I voted for Mitt Romney. I may have given money to Mitt Romney with some of these people. And this is, that's the type of sort of mentality that they would have. And they were out for themselves. And that notion of executives now in America operating their businesses as a cottage industry for themselves. On the private level, you see that. On a public level, you see it in the form of the way that they get compensated through stock options. All of these changes that took place in the 80s, where you could buybacks were legal, where stock compensation gets taxed at a different rate than the compensation for you to actually work. These created incentives for the executives to do things that were not necessarily in the best interest of the company long term, certainly not in the best interest of the community long term, certainly not in the best interest of the workers long term, and like I say, not even in the best interest of the company long term, but was in their best interest with a 2 to 5 year horizon when their stock interests are going to value. Because look, if it's basically like a side bet. It's a cottage industry that they're operating that is, a barnacle on the side of this ship that is a company and a community and a workers, however you want to look at that. But that barnacle is worth worth millions of dollars to them personally, and in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's just misaligned incentives.
Right. So if Air America was a worker co-op, it would have succeeded. Is the message, right?
I mean, in all honesty, that we were in bankruptcy, and each show was simply operating in the way that it knew best. That is when we had the lowest burn rate and the highest relative revenue rate.
Wow.
And I don't know how you would necessarily operate that as a workers' co-op without, where you would get that initial financing from, to be honest with you, because it takes a tremendous amount of money up front.
Right.
Or at least pretending you have a tremendous amount of money for an extended period of time. And, but there are mechanisms, if the government was to provide low cost loans there are mechanisms. And I don't know, there would be issues like there would be in any enterprise, but I am convinced that there is a way to do that where it is much more decentralized, and the workers who are working there have a lot more power. And a co-op, it seems to me,
to your point that they would be more even financially successful because they know their audience, they know what their audience wants, they know the people that can reach their audience. I think that that's a pretty powerful rebuttal to the idea that that management always knows best, and that they're so super smart and important. And
management had no idea. In fact, the industry itself didn't have any idea. The biggest problems that the ownerships had is they came in and they listened only to that management consultant class because they had no ideas on their own, and so they simply went to the person with the nicest watch, and And that was basically it.
Sounds like a lot of our politicians, frankly.
Yeah. Yep.
Some of them were our politicians, or hope to be, frankly. But it was a real shame in that instance. And I think there's an opportunity. I don't know if I think there is value in enterprises like unions. Who have this type of money, maybe engaging in something like this, and small cooperatives that can do this, certainly with online sort of entities. But I think at the end of the day, radio, right-wing talk radio, is heavily, heavily subsidized by the right. It just is.
Right.
And I don't know radio as a national industry is hugely viable in and of itself, because the return on investment for those radio stations is pretty low at this point. The amount of expenditure that you have, and it's got a lot more competition from the internet, but we need something like this. We, regardless of whether you're talking about, the center to the left, liberal politics, or, more specifically left-wing politics, simply needs to be able to compete in this area.
And that's why, I've had people kind of push back at me, why are you getting on the radio? And I know that we're a little over 20 minutes, so feel free to, let us know that you've got to go, and I want to be respectful of your time. Don't want to keep you very
my
very much
coughing
longer,
fit will my coughing fit will determine it.
Right. Well, but there are folks that are like, why are you paying so much money to be on the radio? Like it's a dying audience. It's you should just do a podcast. And obviously you being on the radio versus you being on YouTube now is different, because it was like 20 years ago that you were on the radio. But you would talk about having authors and skyrocketing their book to the New York Times bestseller list by doing an interview with them, and you just don't have the same. You just don't, even if you're a successful podcast, you just or radio or like YouTube show or Twitch stream, you just don't reach the same amount of people, and it's not as geographically centralized, because y'all have like 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and you get like tens of thousands of people watching every single day, but that's tens of thousands of people across the United States and Canada and the UK, whereas like my local. The local talk radio station that we are on, one of them, the morning show host, he has probably 10,000 people listening to him within a 50 square mile area.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a big difference.
And you're just going to reach people who are not looking for you. Mm-hmm. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's the value of radio, is you're going to reach people who are not looking for you. They're going to stumble on you. They're going to have been listening to a different show on that station, or they're just going to be checking the dial because they don't want to listen to the ad on the other station. And you're going to reach people who you simply cannot reach online, because even with YouTube, there will be right wingers who come across our channel, but it's because they're looking to hate watch, and there is there's some version of this which we try and do by getting into other people's algorithm, so that if you're a fan of this right winger or that right winger, that we pop up because we have engaged them enough that we can break through their algorithm. And that's the way that we can find other people. But there's nothing like radio to reach, and particularly the working class, because radio still remains the one medium that has the most presence in the most homes and lives of Americans. And it is the cheapest medium in which to listen. And so you're going to, you're reaching people who are, they've got their radio on at the job site when they're building, or when they're, working with a group of people, or maybe they're at, a store and working retail, and you're just going to reach people that you can't reach by other means. And it's not the most, it's not the way to get, rich, but it is a great way to further your political agenda.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we struggle with as far as trying to build an online audience, because we don't want to be driven by the clicks necessarily, but we do want to bring people to the channel so that they see the other stuff. And I'm thinking about, there was one time a while back that Jimmy Dore attacked the Chicago Teachers Union, and I was like, okay, this is a good chance for me to talk about Jimmy Dore. And so we did, and Glenn Greenwald talked about unions last week, and so we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. He thinks that Glenn Greenwald thinks that wokeness is the reason. The quote from his article in his Substack is just, it's really fascinating because it's so stupid. The excessive engagement in politics is the number one obstacle to a robust American labor movement. What? And so we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But we talked, we talked about Jimmy Dore, and, a lot of our videos get 50 to 100 views or something. The clips do. And we talked about Jimmy Dore like once. and that clip got 2,000 views. And I'm like,
Right.
why are you watching this drivel? Like, what? But
look.
Also, that brought those, we saw an increase on the other views on our channel after we got those views from that clip. So, I don't. How do you like balance that kind of stuff?
I mean, I certainly am aware of that dynamic, and I got very lucky insofar as that I had come off a radio and I had an email list, and so I had an audience that existed, and I didn't have to, and I got to a certain critical mass early, and I mean we have the same challenge right now, particularly in this era of our politics. On our channel, and we still put out videos, and we cut up our videos, as you know, like, and I think probably you do it in the same way. I mean, I still sort of like base the show as if it was a radio show, and then so our videos, we have a disadvantage right there in terms of like the YouTube world, as it were, because we don't create discrete videos that live in and of themselves. I don't say like, oh, here's this topic, I'm going to say this, and this, and run the video, and then do that, and then the video ends, and then I'm going to move on to the next video. I don't do that. That's what most YouTube shows do. We do essentially a free-ranging show and then clip it afterwards, and that is not, that's not terribly effective for YouTube. In terms of like content, I just continue to just do what I have always done prior to the existence of YouTube, which is I do show, topics that I find interesting, and I don't really care that much as to, how much traction they get. Certainly we target certain right wingers and certain, people who are just, we think are putting out garbage, both for, fun, and I enjoy it and this and that, but also with an eye of like I said, if we can get into their algorithms and pick up a couple of viewers who, we can sort of show them a different perspective on this stuff, we'll do it. So all I would do is I would just make sure that you're conscious of not going for material that because it's going to get clicks. I think you got to just, continue to do what you think is important stuff. And when there is, something that allows you, like, Glenn Greenwald writes that unions shouldn't be involved in politics. I don't know really what that means, but it gives you the opportunity to tell a story about how unions should be involved in politics. And, if using Greenwald as the peg for that, thing gets you more views than all well and good. But you just got to keep, just going to make sure that you're not falling into some type of trap where you're just doing this, exclusively for the clicks. And like I say, I'm lucky insofar as our YouTube numbers can have, and we can still, we can still function and hang on, and some years are leaner than other years, and that's okay. I mean, for us, because we've hit a certain, we've got 5 or 6 employees. And, you know, like I say, some years are leaner than others. And for the most part, we haven't had to when we go through lean years, you know, react to it in a way that cuts people out. And, you know, part of the reason why I did that Peacock stuff for a year was just to sort of get a cushion for what I knew would be a couple of lean years, just because, you know, sadly, people, at least a chunk of people from the center to the left, unless there's, you know, a Donald Trump or George W. Bush type of figure, they go back to brunch, you know.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Sam, I did want to say before you get out of here that I do remember listening to Air America Radio as a 10th grader in Huntsville, Alabama, just desperate to find anything that wasn't George Bush and the war machine. Of course, I was disillusioned by the Iraq War, like many young people, and just searching for something. And so I do remember you and Randy Rhoads and Al Franken, and it was like y'all in Democracy Now! Was about the only media alternatives we had at the time. So I give you a lot of credit and a lot of your comrades a lot of credit for helping to blaze the trail of a independent left media that we have today that is so much more robust than anything I could have imagined back when I was in high school. It's there's stuff out there for everybody, and I think that wouldn't have happened without Air America and those other experiments to get us down the road.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate it, and I really appreciate the work you guys are doing. I think it's really important. I would love to see more people, you know, even people who start off with podcasts, take it to a local radio station for an hour once a week. It's obviously a lot more work, but I think that it's such a unique type of payoff and so unique to radio. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and good luck with it.
Yep. Thanks for your time, Sam. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Sorry it took so long to work out. Appreciate it, guys.
Oh, no worries. We appreciate you going over.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye now.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side are you on?